Hey y'all, showing versus telling, right? So I talk to all of you about this a lot, right? Show, don't tell, right? Let me see an image of this instead of just telling me something. But how do we actually do it? I want to show you some examples from a memoir that I am currently revising, and how ways in which I told and ways in which I am revising it in order to show. So let me get to it. Okay, so this is from an essay in my book, The Gods of Wild Things, that I'm revising. And it really is supposed to explain, or not explain, illustrate, rather, so I caught myself there. It's really supposed to illustrate how my relationship with my father had been healing. Okay, and so this is an earlier version of it, and I'm going to show you a later version of it. This is an earlier version where I'm definitely telling, and I'm going to show you a later version where I'm showing. So we'll just read the last paragraph here, or last two. It says, "For the first time in a long time, I was proud of my father, not because he was catching fish, but because he did not give up. He did not quit. He drowned out the voices in his head and persevered. Those were lessons I learned from my father as well. Finally, our relationship was healing." Okay, so all of this here, I actually highlight very well previously to this. I had already shown this, so I can say it now. If I show it, I can say it, right? But here, finally, our relationship was healing. That's just telling. There's no showing involved in that, right? So let me show you how I revised it in order to show the healing process. Okay, so this is the revised version. So it's the same first paragraph here, or last paragraph rather, in the first one, but it says, "For the first time in a long time, I was proud of my father, not because he was catching fish, but because he did not give up. He did not quit. He drowned out the voices in his head and persevered. Those were lessons I learned from my father as well." You see how I put that up above, right? So, and then as you recall, or if you do recall, it says, "Finally our relationship was healing," right? But the next day, we gathered at the makeshift table beside the river with the guides for dinner. As howler monkeys bellowed through the white noise of cicadas, my father, for the first time, asked me about my own transformation. "Tell me about training horses and how you got clean," he asked. I paused from eating plantain chips and looked up from the table. "Well," I said, "horses, much like life, are all about learning to listen and feel." My father reached for a plantain, then leaned back, tilted his head, and looked me in the eye as I told him my story. So here, right, we went from finally our relationship was healing, which is just totally telling, to here I am giving you an instance where my father's actually asking about me and he's showing interest, right? And so we can take this a step further. I'll show you this. I originally had this as, my father listened. "Well," I said, "horses, much like life, are all about learning to listen and feel." My father listened, right? That's okay, but it's just telling, right? What I did instead is showing. I showed him listening. My father reached for a plantain. He then leaned back, tilted his head, and looked me in the eye as I told him my story. So what I had to do there is I had to think about, okay, well, how does someone listen? I mean, obviously with our ears, duh, right? But like, when we are listening, what does it look like? Right? What do we do with our bodies? So when I say embody something in your text, if I leave you a comment that says embody this, right? This is what I mean, right? My father reached for a plantain, then leaned back, tilted his head, and looked me in the eye as I told him my story. It's so much better than just saying, "I listened." And it's 1,000 times, leagues better than saying, "Finally our relationship is healing." This is the showing versus telling that I really want you to understand, right? When you show, you embody. You use the five senses. You think about what it looks like for someone to do something. To say someone is afraid, that's telling. To show the fear, not necessarily in their eyes, because that's always difficult, or in their smile, or their mouth, but like facial expressions are always difficult. We'll show it in their body. Do they tremble? Do they lean back? Do they guard themselves by putting their hands around themselves? Do they cower? What do they do with their bodies when they are afraid? That's what you want to think about, right? So, show versus tell, it all comes down to embodying the emotion. And sometimes, I should say maybe all the time, or most of the time, that requires a deep amount of reflection for ourselves, right? And this is where some of the self-healing comes in when we're writing memoir. Because if we are talking about someone else, it's a little bit easier sometimes. We can here I'm talking about what my father did. But if we are talking about ourselves, we really have to think into our own bodies and think about the ways our body reacts, what it feels like in our body, right? So actually, I'll give you another example of ways in which I did that, showing fear. Okay, so this is from an essay in the same piece, right? In the same memoir, but it's from an essay that talks about overcoming fear. And so I want to show you how I showed that in my own body, and then I'll talk a little bit about like what kind of reflection that required for me. Both Odie and I looked out across the deep pool in front of us, and I began to get queasy. He pranced at the water's edge, and I choked. I'd never swum with a horse, but how did that even work? They don't have fins or feet or anything remotely equipped for aquatic life. Plus, I'm not a small man. What if I was too heavy for him and he drowned? But that girl and her horse just hopped down the bank and swam through the river. So I had to follow. Odie could sense my anxiety and began pawing at the water with his feet and tossing his head. Okay, but here, it's the same paragraph. It's very much changed, both Odie and I, so I'm showing you these are the same things, how I've revised it. The river laid out before us. Odie and I looked across the swirl. Odie's my horse, by the way. Odie and I looked across the swirling current, the swirling currents of deep pools, and I began to get queasy. Whirlpools circled in my stomach. He pranced at the water's edge, and I choked. A bit of stomach acid reached the bottom of my throat. I had never swam with a horse before. How did that even work? They don't have fins or webbed hooves or anything remotely equipped for aquatic life. Okay, so you see the difference here, right? So instead of saying I choked and I began to get queasy, right? I am anxious. Whirlpools circled in my stomach. I choked. A bit of stomach acid reached the bottom of my throat. So how did I go from I began to get queasy to swirling or whirlpools circled in my stomach and a bit of stomach acid reached the bottom of my throat? And what does it even matter, right? Beyond that it's better writing. Well, it matters for us, personally, for the writers, personally, because it required me, and I can speak only for me on this at this point, but it required me to really dive into what does it feel like when I have fear? When I'm afraid of something, how does my body react? Right? And that requires me to have intimate knowledge of what's happening inside my nervous system, what's happening to me, and the benefits of that are outstanding, right? Because when we understand that whirlpools in our stomach, maybe a little stomach acid, or whatever happens, right? When we understand, okay, this is fear, this is stemming, and then we can understand more that this is stemming from, maybe from the unknown, or stemming from, in this case, of my book and myself, stemming from not feeling good enough, right? Ever in my life prior to the whole things that happened in my book, but not feeling good enough. And when I didn't feel good enough, when I felt less than, I had very visceral reactions in my body, right? And for myself, I can say that I used to allow those to rule the day and dictate how I interacted with others and interacted with other people and related to myself and related to other people. But through memoir and the practice of really feeling into our body like that and really tapping into, okay, this is fear. This stems from, could be a number of things for myself. It stems from abandonment issues. It stems from never getting praise when I was a kid. It stems from not getting the proper amount of love. All these things, right? Trauma, all these things. And then not feeling good enough, and so this fear is a fear of inferiority. It helps us understand who we are better, which then in turn, like it's a cyclical thing, man, which then in turn helps us understand how to write our stories better, right? Because we're not just saying this thing happened and then this thing happened and this is the story, this is what happened, here's an event. But we're really digging into what it meant to us, how it made us feel, and where those feelings came from, right? So showing versus telling, we can just add more adjectives, add more imagery. That's what people will tell you. And yes, that works. But that's only half of the battle, right? The juice in this class, in memoir writing, right, is to help heal your own body, in your own story, through your own writing, right? And we do that first. One of the steps, the first step, is really just feeling, right? Feeling those emotions and understanding. And the next step is then understanding where they came from and what they are. There's steps after that, but that's the first part. And it's a really important part of showing versus telling. And when you do it, oh man, when you do that work, that deep reflective work on yourself, and it shows up in your writing is 10 times better, believe me.